Okay, well, thank you everyone for being here today. This is room 2 of session 6, and our first presenter today will be Rachel Siow Robertson of Hong Kong Baptist University, and she will be speaking on mind and heart, measuring and designing for thicker qualities of user experience. And with that, I will turn it over to Rachel.
Great, let me just share the presentation. Okay, hopefully it's coming up okay.
Looks clear.
Great. Well, thank you so much, especially to the organizers for having me. Today I'm going to be speaking about an interdisciplinary project that I've been doing over the past year, together with Jennifer George, who's based in the UK. She's head of computing at Goldsmiths, and Matthew Johnson, who's another philosopher like me, who was based at Oxford during this project. Just to set the scene, the three of us got together to talk about joy in user experience of digital technologies. And really where we started was a lot of positives of our own experience and the experiences within our communities, educational communities, and just personally of using digital technologies. So things like supporting diversity and inclusion, accessibility, enjoying beautiful and clever video games, taking a lot of comfort in virtual communities, especially during lots of lockdowns. And we're also really interested in lots of user experience frameworks which focus on things like delight, well-being, virtue, humaneness, and justice, and so on. At the same time, we were sort of weighed down a bit by persistent negatives in our experience as well. So the three of us all struggle with doom scrolling through ever updating bad news on our different apps and news feeds. We kept bumping up against misinformation, malinformation, having constant alerts and updates that kept bringing us back to these bad habits. And a lot of these frustrations really seemed built in to technologies. So things like having a new phone or laptop that just comes loaded with junkware that really slows everything down and is not needed, and so on. So we really started with the idea that digital technology, and then of course increasingly AI assisted technology, is part of everyday life, but in both message and medium it often caters towards low quality engagements. But in personal experience, and certainly in theory, we really believe that it could support deeper social connections alongside normative and more cognitively engaged elements. And so our task for this project was to develop a design framework and test it out with some case studies to explore how a higher quality experience could be supported within design. So to do this, we sort of started with looking at some existing UX frameworks and trying to see what was it about these that seemed to end up prioritizing a thinner kind of experience or more negative kinds of experiences. And here are some examples that we were looking at. These are 2 examples from researchers at Google, actually, and they're quite commonly used, I believe, within Google and elsewhere. The overall framework is called HEART, and it measures things like happiness, engagement, the adoption of certain platforms, how it retains users, and how successfully users can use different features. And within that, they have a way of measuring happiness that we were particularly interested in. And that's on the left-hand side of the table here. And that asks, it's a survey that asks questions about user satisfaction, likelihood to recommend, any frustrations or appreciations with various attributes, just questions about what tasks they're actually using it for and how satisfied they are with those individual tasks. And then in terms of engagement, there's these questions about how long they spend using the product and how often they use the product each time as well. So we were thinking about these things, these existing frameworks, and the concern that we had was that HEART and frameworks like HEART seem to optimize for a kind of thin user experience. And we were thinking that these can maybe come in at least three kinds, maybe not exhaustive and not exclusive, but 3 kinds of concern, at least for us. The first is addictive kinds of user experience. So you could think about problematic habits or compulsive behaviors like chasing after likes and views on social media posts or something like that. Mindless experience, so things like doom scrolling maybe, or just passively scrolling through endlessly updating news feeds. And then the third kind that we were worried about was malicious experience. So things like trolling, bullying, nudging, harassment, or propagating different kinds of misinformation or harmful content. In each case, we were thinking, users could be engaged for long periods of time. They could be successfully using many design features and have high levels of satisfaction, but there's something lacking in their experience. These are not the kinds of experiences that actually contribute to well-being or overall community flourishing. So with that in mind, we thought, what would thick user experience look like? And we suggested that we look at some of the latest research on joy. So there's lots of definitions of joy, but one that we were interested in was joy as an intense feeling of fulfillment and a deep alignment between some good in the world and oneself and others. And so this is from some work that Matthew Johnson has been doing, and we've been working on together as well. And it draws on two different areas of psychology, positive psychology and developmental psychology. And using that, we've identified 5 dimensions for a new user experience framework. Just really briefly, what do those look like? First of all, we consider motivation. So those have to do with the drives and conditions for using a product and how well that product supports motivations for joy. So things like safety, freedom, ease, and creativity. The second really crucial element is integrity. So how well a product enables a user to integrate properly with the world, themselves, and others. So there's a sort of 3-directional understanding of integrity there. The third is intensity. So not just whether they have a positive experience, but how strong that experience is. The aim here is to screen out maybe low-level mindlessness or the kind of temporary addictive highs that someone might get. Fourthly, a normative dimension. So that has to do with moral and aesthetic features, which are connected with joy, like beauty, gratitude, and positive social connection. And the 5th dimension is dependence. So this is about how end users attend to factors outside of their control. So factors contributing to gratitude and fairness, for example. We think these sorts of kinds of awareness is a mark of greater cognitive engagement. So with those 5 features in mind, the idea is that you can design for thicker user experience. You can assess a range of motivations and intensities of experience. You can promote a rich emotional and cognitive profile that includes recognition of integrity, dependence on external factors, and normative assessments. There's more granularity, we hope, for assessing effect and motivation. And we hope that we can go beyond behavioral data or self-reported use and really consider what the normative and cognitive dimensions are at work. So that's sort of how we got to our new framework. And in the remaining time, I just want to introduce a couple of case studies that we've done just to show how this framework can be put to use, because it's quite general and we intend it to be a bit like HEART, which is the Google framework we started with, which, although happiness has some survey questions attached, is quite open to how researchers want to use it, how designers want to use it. And we see MIIND as something similar to be used throughout the design process. So the first example that I wanted to just share with you is a case study of a social media platform. So here we were looking at design features of a new platform, which was intended to be a sort of alternative to major social media platforms, in that it doesn't have things like a like or comment function. It doesn't count views or shares, and it's sort of intentionally trying to set itself up against some of those other features. And so our interest was in testing whether these design principles, which map well onto the MIIND framework, are really effective in bringing about positive and thicker user experience. So we developed some survey questions for both HEART and MIIND, and we sent them out to users. Some examples just there on the slide. We only have 6 complete responses so far, partly because it's quite a new platform, so there's very few long-term users. But just to share a couple of things that we noticed, I guess the main thing that we were seeing from comparing and putting together the responses from the heart section and the mind section is that there was a difference in focus between the two kinds of approaches, the two frameworks, and MIND really supplemented what we were seeing with the heart survey responses. So for example, when it came to questions about motivation for use and satisfaction, the heart type survey questions, which had to do with engagement and adoption and retention over time and things like that, elicited mostly technical comments in long form responses. So people were commenting on things like limits on posts and editing capacities and saying, oh, this feature is going wrong or something like that. Whereas the MIND type questions tended to elicit more personal reflections. So people spoke more broadly or wrote more broadly about their desire to use the app for specific purposes, like storing memories, and the things that they valued about the platform, like a feeling of safety and a lack of distraction. There's also a contrast between the time frame that people used when they responded to these different kinds of questions. So whereas heart, the question is quite more aimed at a snapshot of your current satisfaction. So just indicate your satisfaction in these following areas. MIND questions that we developed had questions about how motivations changed over time and led the users to reflect on what led to those changes and whether they were happy with those changes or not. We think that those sorts of things also went into a difference between how people were reflected on the intensity and normativity of their experiences. So heart is very straightforward, just how satisfied are you, how many times per week and how many minutes do you use this each time. Whereas for MIND, we were asking more about the quality of their experience and the kind of words that people used, really brought out things like being calm, having gratitude, beauty, or making more of an impact as some things that they really valued or wanted to see more of. An interesting thing is that in some sense, the satisfaction and engagement metrics came apart for this platform. And I think I've heard that this can be quite common, that you might have high satisfaction overall, but low engagement, or high engagement and low satisfaction. And in the MIND part of the survey, we got some responses that might help explain this trend, because people were talking about how the intensity of the experience was actually quite low, but it was low in a good way, so it was calm. It didn't make them feel like they had to keep going. This might be a problem that I'll discuss a little bit later, in that maybe it's non-addictive, and so one person said the app isn't sticky enough, and they were saying, oh, it really was hard to get into the habit of using it. The final thing that we noticed was people rarely reflected on anything to do with their external factors involved, whereas with the MIND section of the survey, people really emphasized that they were looking for a more positive type of experience, and they emphasized gratitude in particular of finding it. So we built this sort of picture using both, and we thought MIND was an interesting supplement to heart in that respect. Just moving on briefly, the next case study was less to do with once the product was finished, and this actually brought MIND principles in at the construction phase, so design. And this was a creation of a VR storytelling of a refugee's family and their journey from Afghanistan to England. And so this was work that we did with a student of Jennifer's. So she developed this film as part of a project at the Barbican Centre in the UK. And we were involved from the start. So she was using some of these principles to explore whether building for joy in this VR experience could help support a more positive encounter, even though it was a story that was distressful and very difficult in stages. And this was sort of coming out of the realization that There have been critiques of empathy machines and that sort of thing, especially with VR, that sort of intensely negative experience can sometimes reinforce bias, might demotivate users, might result in actually reduced capacities to offer help. And so the aim with this project was to really emphasize the MIIND features and really promote a sense of joy, which results from recognition of self-efficacy. It involves gaining new skills and resources. And the idea was that this could protect against demotivation and emotional burnout and really help empower those subjects of the film, as well as the people encountering it. So that was quite focused on in the integrity section of MIIND, but in constructing this experience, they also thought about intensity as well as normative factors. So they were trying to really distinguish between negative normative dimensions of voyeurism, sadism, or schadenfreude, and things like that, and promote more positive experiences by emphasizing beauty, gratitude, and positive social connection throughout the experience. So that was an example of how the MIIND principles were at work even from the very start in the construction of this virtual reality experience. Just the last case study that I want to mention is in the design and evaluation of fitness apps. So here actually quite a similar story to, though it's quite different case to the VR experience. The idea was to not only evaluate existing fitness apps using a survey, but also to try and build a better one. So the main question here was how users of fitness apps are often prone to a drop-off in engagement in the short term, or at least prior to meeting their goals. And again, another student of Jennifer's worked with us to investigate why is this happening, and is there something in design that can counter this? And again, they were interested in the MIIND framework because joy is one of those things that protects against burnout and has to do with pursuing goals and not having this kind of hedonic adaptation. So in both the evaluation of existing apps and then also building the new app, they found the MIIND principles quite helpful to focus on, including thinking about motivation. So asking specific questions about motivations to do with joy, like freedom and ability to experiment, pursuing goals and rewards, achieving goals and achieving greater self-awareness, for example. And they found that all of these were really important to users of existing apps and also when people were testing out the prototypes. And they also found that users were really aware of their motivation shifting when using such apps. So there was a real desire to avoid competition or seeking praise or blame from others and a dislike of virtual rewards, because the feeling was that all of those things detracted from the actual achievement of having exercise and gaining in fitness. And so a design feature coming out of that was instead of trying to promote further activity by increasing competitiveness or something like that, the suggestion was to have a pop-up, for example, reminding users of previous progress and unexpected achievements, especially if they were tempted to skip exercise for the day or something like that. Similarly, with integrity, the question was how to help people to achieve a sense of personal significance and a focus on personal goals. There were a lot of requests for features that would allow them more freedom to set goals and adapt, and also that non-competitive aspect of social connection. And so here, a suggestion was to offer alternative tasks when users wanted to skip or give up, rather than having them rigidly set tasks that they either had to do, but they had to give up. And finally, the dependent aspect of trying to tackle burnout. The suggestion there was to highlight unexpected achievements from the past, so linking to gratitude and maybe factors outside of your current control, in that in the past you were able to achieve things you didn't expect, perhaps in the future you could achieve things also. So that's just a brief tour through some of the work that we've been doing. Just to sum up, our idea is that MIIND principles can supplement the heart framework well, in the sense that it allows greater granularity, especially into motivations, intensities, and goals that people have. And it provides a space for normative assessments and goals, both in terms of moral, but also aesthetic. And just two reflections to finish off. The first is that we were seeing that it's really helpful for MIIND to be there from the start of the design process. So from the conception of the design, when people are doing requirement specifications, and then repeatedly evaluating it to ensure it's delivering. This is partly because we saw that it was quite difficult to add these in retrospectively, for example, with the fitness apps. The other thing that we were thinking about towards the end of looking at these case studies is it did raise a lot of questions for us. So there are questions about financial profitability, given those differences between engagement and satisfaction that we were teasing out between heart and mind. And that overall broad question, I think, of whether designing for MIIND or other values would actually tackle some of the erosion of trust in tech. And especially as we move towards AI-assisted systems. And we're not sure. We think that as long as there's a money-making aspect from attention and increased engagement, maybe within companies, there's not a huge amount of interest in the quality of that attention engagement within the design process. And so ultimately, as much as we hope that MIIND-like principles can be prioritized, it may well depend on changing structures outside of design as well to really make sure that high quality user experience can be safeguarded. Thanks so much. That's all I have to share.